Hello and welcome to Building Custom Integrations with Pardot. This breakout session will get into the various tools in the Marcom stack and discuss how we can get them to work with Pardot, what information you might need, and just help you toward the ever-present goal of making all of our tools work together. My name is Lauren Drugan. I am a solution engineer here at Sercante, and I have the pleasure of working every day with Mike Cruiser, who is a solution architect here at Sercante, and we will be tag teaming this presentation. Please feel free to chat any questions you have as we go along into the chat. Ask anything. We will definitely keep up with it and answer as we go along. So let's dive right in. We have all seen some version of this marketing technology landscape document and how it has grown significantly over the years. And the big question that we all have when we hear about a fun new product is, does it integrate? Is it going to sync up with the tools I already have in my MarTech stack? And if it will, how do I make it work? So the big question, does it integrate? We're going to borrow something from improv comedy, where we start with yes and. Yes, Pardot integrates with everything, and let's talk more about our specific use case so we can determine the best path for integration. Now, you will notice there's a pretty big asterisk in there, so let's get that out of the way real quick. There are some barriers to integration. The first being, if we can't identify what we need, we're not going to be able to build an integration for that. The second, the scope is huge. The third, the scope is huge and it will cost too much money or take too long to build. We also have situations where an integration already exists to Salesforce and we can pull that information into Pardot, and it would cost a lot of money or take many months to build the integration directly to Pardot. So those are some cases where you might not necessarily want to go down the path of building that integration into Pardot itself. One of the other barriers is whether we have technical resources to support the project, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then another barrier is when we want Pardot to integrate with a tool that has nothing to do with marketing or sales, maybe like our dishwasher.
I'm working on that. I'm so close. It's going to send me emails when my kids do the dishes.
Keep an eye on Twitter, y'all. Cruiser will update us when he finally gets that working. So these are all some red flags when it comes to custom integration projects. So how do you identify these red flags, and how do you tell a project that is good for a custom integration? That's when you get into some discovery questions. The first question we need to ask is what tool we need to integrate. We also need to have a really solid understanding of how our team is using that tool today, and if there are plans to replace it. We've all been in situations where we've built a program or an integration for something, and 3 months later, the sales team decides that they don't want to use that tool anymore, and we get to start over from scratch. So definitely have some of those hard conversations with your entire team, figure out how they're using the tool today, if they plan to continue to use the tool, if they're actively looking for a replacement, and base your decisions off of that. You also want to know what kinds of automations you want to build out in Pardot from this integration. How often you need your data synced. Do you need it daily? Do you need it hourly? Is it okay to just have a weekly sync? Are you open to a Salesforce integration if a direct to Pardot integration is not available? So things like Ringlead and Lean Data integrate directly into Salesforce, so there's not really a need to build a workaround into Pardot itself. You also do need to consider which Pardot tier you have and whether your org is AMPC, so whether you have API version 3 or 4, as that will affect your API options, and we actually have a handy chart for that later on in the slide deck. So some really good integration examples are worked out here. The first being, I use On24 for my webinars, and I need to sync registrations into Pardot, send event reminder emails, and follow up with attendees. This is a really good example because this tells us what tool we're looking at, what we need to do with the information once it comes into Pardot, approximately how often we'll need that information updated, at least as often as the company is having webinars, and the full scope of what we plan to do with all of that information. Some other examples, I use Pardot alongside HubSpot and I need to sync unsubscribes between systems. I use Gravity Forms on a WordPress site and I need to send my form fills into Pardot. I need to set up an abandoned cart program in Pardot for my e-commerce site. I host a web forum and I need to store usernames and passwords in Pardot prospect records. And I need to fetch data from an FTP and upload it into Pardot. These are all really good examples of what kind of integrations into Pardot that you may be dealing with. So let's talk integration options. We have the pre-built connectors that are built by Pardot to pass data back and forth for a selection of applications. These are the ones that we see in Pardot when we go to the connectors section. We have third-party integrations, so plugins or other third-party tools that connect Pardot to additional services like Automate, Clearbit, Qualified, Terminus, WordPress plugins, those kinds of tools. And then we have the Pardot API. So API is Application Programming Interface, which allows for operations, which are operations that allow developers to communicate between services. So this is where we get into code to connect Pardot to internal or external tools, such as EDH, EDW, and data lakes, e-commerce platforms, website platforms, internal SaaS platforms, and ERPs. So these are the integration options from the back end of things. But what is the customer experience like for these integration options? For pre-built connectors, it's similar to needing a chair and going to Rooms to Go, where you purchase a chair, then it's delivered to your house, either pre-assembled or they assemble it for you when they bring it to your house, and you have a chair. For third-party integrations, it's like you need a chair, so you go to IKEA and you pick out the chair you want, you buy the flat pack, you go back to your house, put it together, probably curse a little bit, maybe lose a piece or two, but in the end, you have a working chair. And with the Pardot API, it's like you need a chair, so you go to Lowe's and you buy all of the things that you would need to build a chair yourself. Wood, screws, glue, a saw, anything else you might need. Then you design the chair and you build it yourself. In the end, you have a good chair. It's just about how you got there. So let's talk about some of those third-party integrations. Three main paths for third-party integrations without using code are a SaaS tool that has their own plug-and-play Pardot integration. These are tools like Drift and Qualified, which is similar to the Rooms to Go option, where you need a chair and you are delivered a completely assembled chair and it works. The second option is doing Pardot wizardry via form handler to capture information. So this is a little bit like an IKEA option where you know what you want and it's pretty easy to make it work, but there is a little bit of a heavy lift. You do have to put some pieces together. The third option is to use an integration platform as a service to connect services. So this is like Tray.io or Zapier. And again, similar to IKEA, where there is a little bit of a heavy lift that you need. So some third-party integration examples are data cleansing and merging duplicates, integration with scheduling tools, conversational marketing, chatbots, and live chat integrations, sending SMS and text through Engagement Studio, integrating print fulfillment in Engagement Studio, tracking subscription processes centrally for multiple marketing automation platforms, connecting with WordPress forms, data augmentation, and analytics wizardry. So let's get into what one of those examples looks like. Cruiser, you want to walk us through this one?
Yeah, so a common request is, LinkedIn lead gen forms to Pardot, and an easy tool is Zapier. So we can connect that. When we get a new lead from LinkedIn, we can put it into Pardot. This particular, what we have in the screenshot, I'm not a fan of this. So here we're using the Zapier's Pardot API integration, but I don't think that's the right tool for the job. I would actually much prefer having a Pardot form handler. That way, what we present to the sales team, it makes more sense to them. Like, there was a form fill. Why isn't it coming in and presenting to me as a form fill? What we have on the screen now wouldn't do that. But if we actually use a different technology within Zapier, we would present the form fill as a form fill to the sales team. So we got to make sure that whatever tooling we pick, whatever integration we do, we keep in mind what we're trying to do and how that's going to present to the consumers of the information, so we pick that right path.
Absolutely.
So integrating via the Pardot API. This is stuff I love. I'm excited about this. All right, so why is the API path less traveled? It requires custom code. You need like a computer geek like me to like start wiggling fingers and making it work. There's a lot of technologies that we can do with it. It's just kind of hard to get started in, and it requires time, like a lot of time. There's like the number of hours to build it, but there's also like other work needs to get done. So a 40 hours doesn't mean 1 week. That means 2 months. So it's really hard to get started because it takes a lot of resources, a lot of staff time, a lot of knowledge to get started. So next we have some integration examples. Connecting Pardot to basically any other tool that has an API that holds an email address, like my dishwasher. A dishwasher doesn't have an email address, right? So it's really challenging to connect, an API to something that doesn't have that unique key that Pardot uses, because Pardot's an email tool at the end of it, right? Dishes don't have email addresses. Adding data to Pardot by FTP, right? We got like this big thing. We want to just automatically push lots of data into Pardot. That's another great usage example. Triggering Pardot to send emails to define prospect engagement paths. Pardot rules, like rules that we can't define in Pardot, we can define those externally, write that back in as data, as fields, as custom fields, so that way we can have Pardot engagement studios do things that we can't really easily define on the built-in tooling. Reporting, ad hoc reporting, like I'm always checking, like, did this happen? What are the pieces to connect this? Or getting it into a Tableau or one of our other tools that doesn't connect easily as well. So those are some examples of what we can do for API integrations. FTP Pardot, right? It sounds simple. There's a lot of moving pieces here. There's a lot of different things. This is why it takes 30 to 40 hours to do something that seems like it should only take an hour or two. Clearing picklist value, the sync errors, like Pardot sync errors to CRM. This is a huge one. Probably the biggest use of the Pardot API I see is this solving this particular problem. So we have records that won't sync to CRM because CRM has valid field validation, and we have values that got imported from a trade show that their spelling of the countries are different than what our CRM expects, and we have to make some of these data transformations to get the data to go into the CRM. So having an automated process that will just go in, detect incorrect data, and do the transform to correct it. That way our data can go into our Salesforce quickly, reliably, with little risk of being delayed or like weeks or months before somebody realizes that it didn't sync. And now we've lost a lead, we've lost revenue because they've gotten purchased from somebody else. Next. The API is complex. We have different requirements. If it's AMC, it's version 4. If it's not AMC, it's version 3. Different Pardot tiers. Some, like the lowest tier, doesn't actually support the API. So if we want to do an API integration, we have to have a middle or an upper tier of Pardot. Now with our sandboxes and our demo orgs, the API actually has to talk to a different set of servers for our sandboxes and demo orgs than for our production orgs. Next. So, yeah, this is cool. The data audit. One of the things that a lot of times we need to do is like get our arms wrapped around everything that we have in Pardot, and it's very time consuming to look through 50 items on a page, copy paste it into Excel, and then do this 13 14 times, and then transform that data to something that we can use so that we can look at the data in a slightly different form so we can make better business decisions. We can use the API to actually suck all that data out automatically and just create the reports for us, so we can take a lot of the human time out of these processes, and the humans can just do the smart things like figuring out what's this mean. Next, best practices. Give every Pardot integration its own user. This is great because it tells us in our audit logs who's making the changes. Why did this field value change? It's wrong. Well, okay, it's this tool. Now we know, okay, let's go fix that tool. And also it allows us to take vacations. The programmer geeks, we can take vacations because the business users, the marketing director can go in and change the login password on an integration when we just need to make this stop. Right now, just make it stop. We can't get a hold of whoever wrote the code to fix it. Just stop. That's what giving us the ability, having multiple unique logins for everything. That's the value of that. We're getting identity licenses, 100 identity licenses, primarily for our marketing only users to be able to log into Salesforce, but we can also use those for our integrations. So for the next slide, we have a change coming February 15th, single sign-on. All Pardot logins are going to be single sign-on only logins. This includes our API. Today, we're in a bit of a bad place with the API because some tools are still using only the traditional logins, and they don't yet support single sign-on. Another reason why we should have multiple, a login for each one is we have one for this old stuff, and then as we turn on single sign-on, as they become available in our tools that we're plugging into Salesforce or Pardot, that becomes available to us. We do have a real deadline on the 15th of February. We need to make sure that all of our integrations are using the new logins, or they're going to stop working on it. So pay attention, kind of audit what we've got going on, and be aware that not all tools support that. Now, there's going to be tools that come February 15th, they're still not ready because they didn't realize that this change is coming. If you see one that's not ready, let them know, hey, we've got this change. We have 2 months. Can we get this fixed? That would be helpful for just everybody, and also for yourself, for your own business continuity, is being able to keep the tools working. So single sign-on is kind of important. There's a bunch of resources for API integrations, whether it's the Zapier, kind of no-code path. Great resources. One of the partners sponsors was Mercado. They also provide that no-code capability. And then there's also the more manual code version integrations that have happened as well. So we have some content on the spot for Pardot, and the API documentation, success community. If you have questions, just ask them on the success community. You can ping me directly if it's like an API code question. I'll try to answer it. Is that it, or do we have one more slide, Lauren?
That is it. And we actually have a lot of questions about SSO, so I was wondering if maybe we could go back and maybe talk through some of those.
Yeah. So looking at the Q&A section, which is in the chat, this is the top right corner. You can put your Q&A in there. How about demo orgs? Does this also need to be moved to single sign-on? Yes, our demo orgs also will need to be used to single sign-on by the 15th. Yes. Where can we see the API users? All right. So in Pardot, if we go into our settings, there's going to be a second time. It's like usage limits and usage, I believe it's titled. It's the second tab on our settings screen. So we got account information, we got usage and limits. We click on that. The API is going to be one of the first, if the first drop down. You open that up, and that will show us all of the API usages for the last 7 days. We basically can click on each day and see what tools are logging in to our Pardot instance by API. You just write down all the different email addresses that are showing up, and that should give us an idea of who's logging in, what tools we're going to need to audit. That's like how we audit that usage. But that's the way I deal with it. There's probably another way or two to work through that. Do we have questions in the chat itself around this?
Yes, one question is confirming the number of identity licenses. Is it 100?
What I understand is we're getting a bundle of 100 identity licenses. You probably need to speak to your Salesforce salesperson to confirm that, or find some documentation on that. But I think that's what we're getting is 100. It covers like 98.2% of like every Pardot instance. Their needs are under that 100, so that's why that value was picked from what I've read in release notes and stuff like that. Can we get a link reference on the one above more info? I'm looking at Amy's chat quest. There was a link reference on the support slide.
Yep, I think that was the one about Salesforce connected apps, so I will grab that and put it in the chat.
If you have specific questions, it helps if they're in the Q&A instead of trying to sort through these in the chat. API usage. Yeah. Any other questions that we're seeing?
One from a bit back, completely different topic, but Brandy Chai wants to know, should we integrate LinkedIn with Salesforce or Pardot? Do you have a recommendation on that?
It depends on what your organization's business needs are. I'm a marketer, right? So I tend to like it coming into marketing. I tend to like having the completion actions that I can bolt onto that Pardot form handler, so I can drop that individual into any nurturing or something like that comes in from LinkedIn, the ad or whatever context is provided. With an automation rule that like we'll send it straight to Salesforce, so that way the salesperson can follow up immediately, because form fills tend to infer that we need a very prompt human response. So yes, I'll run them through Pardot, just so Pardot is aware of them, and we can start following the normal interaction rules. Like if sales doesn't create an opportunity, okay, marketing, we're going to run with this. Sales creates that opportunity. Maybe our business rules are marketing. We quit talking to open opportunities because we don't want to disrupt that conversation, right? Yeah, that's how I would look at that, and why I would integrate to Pardot and not Salesforce. But either is a correct way. Both are a good way.
All right, a couple other questions came into Q&A. Amy wants to know, has anyone used identity licenses yet? She does see them in her org.
Yeah, we've used them some. Actually, my Pardot login is an identity login. I don't write a full Salesforce license. No, okay, but yeah, so yeah, we use them. We have a blog post, a couple blog posts about that on the spot for Pardot. So you can go there and look for SSO. We'll try to find all of the stuff around this particular topic. And I see another question from Peter. We had a problem when we were integrating LinkedIn lead gen forms with Zapier. Was that the API didn't support drop-down custom fields. How can this be solved? I don't know at the moment. I'd have to look at it. I mean, one way is to not use the drop-down custom fields. That's one way, but you probably need those. We wouldn't ask the question if we didn't need those. Another thing is just use a different tool. I mean, there's a lot of other tools that can do that Zapier thing. Workato, Trade.io, those both work as well. And another thing is, do we need that for the real-time conversation? Can we export that the data like once a week? So we ignore those custom fields for the near real-time process, and then like once a week we can export the data and then bring in the missing data. There's just a lot of ways to navigate that. I don't know enough details to really be able to point you in the right direction, but that's some options to probably look at.
I think that covers the questions that we've gotten in so far.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending the session. There's one more round of sessions, correct? Or is this actually the last? No, we've got a final keynote, don't we? Yeah, there's a closing keynote here in a few minutes. An hour and 22 minutes. There's the closing keynote.
There are 2 more rounds of sessions starting at 12:05 p.m. Eastern and then 12:40 p.m. Eastern, and then the closing keynote after that.
All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.